Asociada en Pedagogía del Centro de Innovación en Enseñanza e Investigación de la 1er Illinois University. En el año 2008, profesora invitada para impartir cursos de administración en la Universidad Panamericana en Guadalajara, Jalisco. Ha realizado diversas publicaciones, ha impartido cursos desde el año 2000 en la 1er Illinois University en los temas de administración estratégica, administración internacional, toma de decisiones administrativas, administración de carrera, teoría organizacional, administración de operaciones, desarrollo organizacional y recursos humanos. Con el tema aplicación de plataformas virtuales de interacción en proyectos de investigación universitarios internacionales e interinstitucionales, desde la 1er Illinois University recibamos con un fuerte aplauso a la doctora Bárbara Rivens. Buenos días, adelante por favor.
Good morning. Next. What I'm going to talk to you about this morning is some projects that I've worked on with virtual teams and provide you with some of the background and the experience, things that I've learned, and to encourage you to get involved. Many U.S. schools would love to partner with Mexican classes and schools to do these sorts of projects. So I'm hoping that me being here can lay some groundwork and help you understand how important virtual teams are for your students' future and how you can make steps to help them really be prepared for their future. So I want to start with sort of a basic definition of what is a virtual team, because we all know that term, or we've heard that term, but what does it really mean? And then I'm going to use that and develop that into sharing some of my experience and some encouragement for all of you. The first thing to mention with a virtual team is that you would like to have coworkers with complementary skills. A virtual team is a wonderful thing in the sense that we can look for the best skill sets that fit together, and we're not trapped by who is together geographically or organizationally. So this common purpose and goals is very important to find people who fit together and will move us toward that. But we also have to recognize that there is a need for accountability. The second thing with a virtual team is that they're geographically and organizationally dispersed. And when we think about examples in businesses of virtual teams, one of the major things we often think about is product development teams that are dispersed around the entire world. Some of you may have read or heard about some of the design teams, particularly for automotive situations, where they have workers from all around the world, in China and India, in Europe, in the United States, in South and Central America, all working together on updating and designing new models of cars. This is very freeing for organizations to be able to use these dispersed teams, because it really means we can put the best minds together. So think about how we need to prepare our students if they're going to be working with people who are not in the next cubicle or are not just down the hallway, but they are geographically dispersed from them. And then the third aspect of virtual teams is that we're using technology to reach our goal. One of the really important upshots of this is that people really need to have a comfort level with using technology for communication, and not just communication on a one-to-one basis, but communication within a group. And that becomes really complicated for how do we train our students to get comfortable with technology to that level. Next. So one of the things that I wanted to touch on just a minute are what are some of the pros and cons of virtual teams, and how we can we go to the next slide? How that makes it important for students to have the skills of working in a virtual team. I don't know where my slide person is. Oh, there we go. Benefits. One of the big benefits is that it allows us to draw from a big group of people. If we are not conditioned by our organizational constraints, we're not conditioned by geographical or time constraints even, we have a much larger pool of people we can draw from to put together the best people on a particular project. I think that's really important for our students to understand that this is the way business now works, because it is inherent in that they have to be best qualified to get these opportunities. How do we help them become best qualified people? And one of the things is to give them experiences in virtual teams and give them the opportunities to develop their skill sets so that they have a comfort level and they can rest on their merits. The other piece of that benefit is it minimizes cliques and politics. We all know the political sorts of things that can happen in a workplace and the way that can sometimes interfere with work. If we're working virtually, we transcend some of those day-to-day relationship issues, whether you like someone or don't like someone, because we're working on a more content-based level, and yet you still know them, but at a different sort of level. And so it can provide a way to say, I don't have to pick these people because they like each other. I can pick the best people for the job. One of the drawbacks, some of the drawbacks are a loss of social contact. That's the opposite side of that clique problem. While we don't have group dynamics interfering, we also lose some of the group connectedness, some of the social capital that can be gained from people who work together well and work together often. There also can be some real feelings of isolation that can come when you are working with a team but you never ever see them face to face. It's sometimes hard to understand how you fit into that team. And then the last one here is a lack of trust, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about trust in just a few moments. Next. Some of the success factors in virtual teams that are very important for us to understand, because we need to prepare our students to play this role and to have these opportunities. It's very important to understand this high level of trust among team members. When we're at an arm's length from somebody and we don't have the ability to just stick our head in their cubicle next door and say, hey, get on the ball, get going, I need you to get this done. But we have to do it in writing, or we have to do it via an email, in a long distance sort of thing. It creates some real trust issues, some real challenges when they're not face to face. We need to prepare our students to deal with that. They're used to working in teams, but they're used to working on teams with their peers who are sitting next to them in the classroom day after day, or sitting next to them in a study group or in the library. And it's different when there is some distance involved. Another success factor in virtual teams that's very important is an effective use of technology. And I think this is one that we need to teach our students about, because we have a tendency to think of our students as all very technological savvy because they're young and they grew up with the internet and they grew up with email and they're growing up with Facebook. And yet that does not mean they know how to use them effectively. They can get in some very bad habits because they've maybe used these for very social things, not necessarily for a professional situation. And I don't know what the situation is exactly here in Mexico, but I know many of the Mexican students I've worked with are very savvy with Facebooking each other. And I'm connected with a few of my former Mexican students, and I see they're doing the same thing my American students do, which is sometimes putting everything out there, and sometimes that doesn't look so professional, doesn't give such a great impression. And so we need to help them understand that technology is a tool, but it needs to be used wisely. It's not just that I can turn it on and make it do things. It's the impressions it gives that can be very, very important. So that's an important piece of the puzzle that they need to understand. To have success in a virtual team, they have to have a good implementation of the team concept. And anybody who has taken or taught, especially taught, a basic management administration sort of class, we do talk about teams. We talk about forming, storming, norming. We talk about gatekeeping. We talk about the different roles. We talk about a lot of things, but talking about them and getting our students to use these concepts effectively is not always the same thing as well. And I'm sure many of you have had the same experience I have. We put them together in a team in the classroom and say, go do this, and later we find out they weren't using the team concept very well. So we need to pay attention to teaching them how to really implement this and give them practice and give them feedback about using their team concepts well. And then the last one is effective individual performance. And I just had an article come across my desk about college students procrastinating. Do any of your Mexican students procrastinate? Yes, I'm seeing heads nodding all over. That's not effective individual performance all the time, is it? They don't put their best work forward when they've waited till the last possible moment. In a virtual team setting, when all I know of you is what I've seen or read on Facebook, the major thing I judge somebody on is their performance. And if our students, as some students can be, are lazy or procrastinating and not doing a good job, they quickly will have a bad impression among their team members, and that will hinder their team performance. They need to understand that the habits they build as students will carry on into their workplace. And so we need to help them understand that they need to develop good habits for individual performance. That can be very important. Next slide. So how do we teach our students about virtual teams? I've just shared with you why I think it's so important and some of the problems I see. Well, we could lecture on it, like I'm lecturing to you. Do you think you could all go out and be effective on a virtual team after I just tell you about it? Probably not. We could have somebody read or even discuss cases about virtual teams. Is that going to help you do it? Maybe not. I can provide statistics about virtual teams and how common they are. I had one of my students a year after graduating come and tell me that she was on 11 virtual teams in her workplace. They're very common, especially in multinational corporations. But is that going to help you really understand what you need to be like to succeed in a virtual team? No. The key to make students grasp this is to put them in a virtual team and give them experience in your classroom of working through the challenges of being on a virtual team. Next slide. So I want to talk just a little bit more about this trust. Effective teamwork always depends on trust, right? We know that if I don't trust you, I'm not going to share what I know with you. I'm not going to rely on you. If I don't trust, you're going to follow through. But it's really important to understand that in a virtual relationship, trust is more ability or task-based than interpersonal or relationship-based. So when we're in the next cubicle, I can like you. We could go have lunch, and that can help me have trust in you. But if you're in Mexico and I'm in the U.S., we can't do lunch to build trust. And our students have to grasp this, that in a virtual environment, it's based on what we see. It's based on that performance. It's based on seeing someone with good abilities use those abilities effectively. The other thing that's really important is to remember that that level of performance across time either builds trust or reduces trust, and it goes both ways. It doesn't take long to destroy trust if you do not follow through with what you have said you were going to do. And in a virtual team, when that's all there is in the relationship, it's very, very important. Next slide. So what are the kinds of things we need to tell our students about when we put them in a virtual team so they understand what will lead to their success? Well, one of the really important things is to help them understand that performance consistency matters a great deal. Okay? When all we do is judge you based on your performance, if you're inconsistent, that trust is eroded very quickly. Well, what does that really mean? A rapid response to team members. When you're working in a virtual team, even if you don't have time to give them the full answer, an acknowledgement that you're working on it can be very, very important to keeping the trust. If I don't see the product of your work, but you at least communicate and tell me you're working on it, so there's a rapid response. Yes, I'm working on that. Yes, I'll do that. That builds trust. If I hear nothing, what do I immediately think? I think you're missing an action. I think you're not going to follow through. The second thing is a reliable response to team members. And I'll give you examples of some of these in just a few minutes from some of the virtual teams my students are working in. But that I know if I give you a task or I share something with you I want your feedback on, I'm going to get it. I can rely on that. A third thing that's really important for establishing trust is how the group was built and the norms that were set for communication, so that we understand if someone sends out an email that there will be a response within a certain time frame, so that we don't go through an entire week and there's no communication. We need to have those norms clearly specified to be carried out. And the last one is the team leader role in reinforcing interactions. When somebody does disappear, when somebody does not follow through, there must be some leader who has the ability to say, okay, what's going on? Who can jump in and help with the situation. Next slide. So, okay, I've laid the groundwork now. What's my experience with this? I'm going to tell you about 2 different grants that I've worked on and share some of the virtual experiences I've had in both of them. And my goal here is to motivate you to think about how you could take your content area, your interest area, and build some of these relationships for your classes, whether they're undergrad classes, master's classes, or even perhaps PhD classes. The first grant that I'm going to share about, I have the basic information up here, but it was based on corporate social responsibility skills, and we had 6 institutions, 2 in Canada, 2 in the United States, and 2 in Mexico. And the whole goal was to get our students to mingle and share what was going on and what they knew, and then to build skills together, hand in hand, so they could understand each other's situation and understand some of the challenges faced in each other's countries. Next slide. So we did 2 different virtual things in this particular grant. The first thing is we had virtual courses. We had courses that were taught solely online that all the students involved in the project took at all 6 institutions. This content delivery provided a way for them to discuss and interact within the course cohort, but also outside of them. And we started this project by using a World Bank Corporate Social Responsibility course. And I want to mention that because it's really important to realize if you want your students involved virtually, it doesn't mean you have to develop all the content from scratch. There are entities out there with courses you can jump into that provide the foundation or the framework for your students to get involved. So the World Bank courses, we had our students working and discussing the content in their own virtual groups within our course, but also there was a chat room for everybody enrolled in the World Bank course. So we had students talking with the ambassador from Kenya to France. They came and said, hey, I was just chatting with an ambassador. I said, that's cool. They had a chance to interact about some of their ideas and their reactions with real-world people who were involved in helping corporate social responsibility ideas get spread. People who had a real concern and interest in this and were learning the content right along with my students, but they were not students. They were, let's just call them real people with real jobs in which this mattered. That was a wonderful experience for the students. In these virtual courses, we also had the students in virtual teams, and this happened to be a project where they were in teams for an entire year. Okay, they started out at their home institutions in the fall where they did the virtual course, and then in January, in the middle, after one semester, we all came together in a venue, and the students spent 3 or 4 days together. And I need to tell you that they had never physically met until that January meeting, but they had worked together in virtual teams for 5 months. And it was gratifying as a professor to see them come together and act like they were old friends. They really had gotten to know each other and enjoy each other. And we were a little worried about that the first time around. How would that have come to be? Maybe they might not like each other. But we found that when they realized this is the task, we have to stick together, they made it work. They put aside any little conflicts. They worked through them and worked them out. And that was a very important experience for these students. Because in a classroom group, a lot of times you can say, oh, I don't like this person, I just won't work with them again. But they knew they were going to be stuck together for the entire year. And they had to work together and they had to get through that. What did they do in these virtual teams? They did some case analyses. For example, we had them do a case about Walmart and the corporate social responsibility of Walmart. They all looked at the same material, they had to discuss it virtually, and then they had to come together as a group to discuss it. And then we also had them do some summaries of academic content. Next slide. Grant number 2 is one that I'm still involved with, and actually the university here is one of our partners in this particular group. It again is 6 schools, 2 in Canada, 2 in the US, and 2 in Mexico. Next slide. And in this particular one, we are actually right this very minute working through this team learning and communication experience where they're looking at a sexual harassment video and then they're discussing it in small groups that are mixed among the different schools, the different countries. Next slide. So, what are some of the issues? What are some of the challenges and obstacles? The first one that was a big deal is timing. How do we time it given different spring breaks? How do we time it given different class schedules, start times, end times, different grading periods? All the students are busy. They go to school, they work, some have families. That's always going to be a challenge. The next one was demographic differences. The student populations vary even across North America. We may have more older students, we may have more females, more males. There are different characteristics that can vary, different income levels, different access to technology, that can make a difference in how able they are to work in a virtual team. Cultural differences. Their values of work and education are not always exactly the same. So we may find, for example, U.S. students procrastinate more. And in the sexual harassment case, I just had somebody email me and say, well, one of your students is taking too long. My student's very frustrated. This was a Canadian professor, and he said, my student's very frustrated with your student. My student, I talked to them, and they didn't think they were procrastinating, but the timing of the work ethic in Canada, they wanted to get it done. They were like, let's get it done now. In the U.S., they were a little slower. That can vary across the different countries. Attitude differences. Not all students want to travel, connect with other people. Not everybody has the mindset for doing this. I would argue they need to do it anyhow. To be globally competitive in the workplace, they need to know how to deal with people from different cultures, and that's really important. Curricular priorities and policies differ, so there may be different challenges with how they're graded, how feedback's given to students, and we need to work through those issues always. And then the resource and business access differs, particularly in the first grant. They had to go interview or visit people in a business and then bring that back and discuss it. And their access to different businesses differed across the countries, and that was a challenge. Next slide. So I've told you the bad side. Now let me tell you the good side, the opportunities that this presents. First of all, I have found it's broadened my approach by learning from each other as faculty, because it's not just about students. Okay, so I have found I've learned a great deal from my Mexican faculty partners and my Canadian faculty partners. I think about organizing projects in a different way because I've heard how they organize them, and that's been a really healthy thing for me to broaden and think about my own work with my students, because it's not just about the students. The faculty get some really good opportunities too. Also, there's a wider scanning of examples and projects that can involve virtual teams. Virtual teams can do all kinds of different things. Problem solving, idea generation. There are many, many different directions that these virtual teams can go that bring wonderful things to your classroom. The third one is that it's important to get students to experience the joys and frustrations of virtual teams to deepen their knowledge, skills, and abilities. It's not always going to work perfectly. I recently, in this semester, have a couple students in the sexual harassment project, and it's not gone real well for one or two of them. They've had maybe a real disagreement with somebody in their virtual group. I had a student the other day who said, "My team has all disappeared on me. I don't know what to do. They've not communicated with me for a few days." And she was so frustrated. And the next day, she'd gotten emails from both team members. But we don't always know when that's coming, when there's no day-to-day interaction and that geographic distance is there. The trust can get strained very easily if you're not meeting my expectations. But it's important for students to realize that, because they need to understand how to set it up in a more healthy way. Maybe they needed to set some more norms at the beginning. Maybe they need to learn how to gently nag other people to get them involved. And I've tried to communicate that with my students, that it's not just easy, same old, same old. Virtual teams are very challenging. Increase the language and cultural intelligence of both the students and the faculty. While our teams, both in the past and currently, are all working in English, my students are definitely finding they pick up some French and some Spanish, because sometimes maybe their Mexican student has a hard time putting something in English, and the two Mexicans discuss it in Spanish and then translate it, and the American students or the Canadian students can observe that discussion in Spanish and start to go, "Oh, I'm starting to understand some of the concepts in another language." Increase the mobility of students and faculty. Sounds like, well, you're talking about virtual teams. Why are they going to go anywhere? One of the things I've definitely noticed, having worked in virtual teams now for about 5 years, once they've done that and they've gotten to know someone from another country, they're much more interested in going to that country. I brought students to Mexico last summer, and a couple of them said, "I heard about somebody who'd really gotten to know some great Mexican people through a project you were with, and I wanted to come and be a part of that." The word gets out, and students are more interested in doing exchanges when they've been exposed to these sorts of things. So I think virtual teams are very important. Next slide. What are some of the things that we've learned? And I'm talking royal we here from several different consortiums. The first one is that it's really important to think about the details ahead. It's really important to think ahead and spend time up front understanding what this virtual team project is going to look like, especially how it's going to be evaluated. Because we all know what students are like. If there's no payoff, if there's no reason for them to put into it, they're not going to. So we need to all understand how will it be evaluated and how will they be given credit for this particular experience. Next one, think about the big picture. What knowledge, skills, and abilities do you want to develop in your students? I've been part of several different virtual experiences here, and we've built different sorts of skills by shaping the experience differently. Choose partners well and make sure that the involved faculty are committed. I've had one failed virtual team experience. I had chatted with somebody at a conference. We talked about putting our students together. We started working on it, and it didn't work out. You need to make sure you, as a faculty member, develop a relationship with the partner in another country, whether it be the U.S. or China or Kenya or wherever. There has to be a faculty relationship, and you have to have trust with that person before you put your students into the mix, or it's going to be likely to fail. Because if you don't have the commitment, they won't have the commitment. Defining assignments and constructs carefully is important, but it can be really hard when they're being used in a different cultural context. That sometimes is hard to think through ahead of time, and yet it's really important to carefully think about how we define leadership and you define leadership if we're going to have the students talk about leadership. Is that really what we both mean, so that we're communicating clearly and the students come in with matched expectations? Invest in developing relationships and mechanisms for data sharing. One of the things I have a tendency to do is to throw students into something and say, go figure it out, because I want them to be innovative and I want them to use the technology that works best for them. But I find that if I don't start them out with some suggestions, they may not follow my suggestions, but if I don't start them out with suggestions, they won't get very far, because sometimes they need that ice broken. I need to tell them, well, you could Skype each other, or you could develop a chat room within our class website they can all jump into, or you can Facebook chat. You can do it all sorts of ways, and then they're like, oh yeah, I do all this technology with my friends. Why can't I do it with some students in Mexico or China or wherever? And there needs to be a dialogue among partners of how to manage the situation and be prepared for possible issues. A real practical example here. We had a huge blizzard in the Midwest. We had classes canceled for several days. That was the day my students were supposed to see the sexual harassment video. So they're getting emails from their Mexican partners and their Canadian partners saying, what do you think about the video? And my students are going, I haven't seen it. So I had to quick email everybody and say, sorry, we had a blizzard, didn't happen, and we had to go to plan B. Okay, it just was delayed for a week. We worked that all out, made the assignments a little later, etc. But you have to be prepared for these things because things happen. Blizzards, hurricanes, things happen. And you need to be prepared and have a good communication network to work through the challenges that do arise. Next slide. So what are some of my conclusions? What are some of the messages I want to leave with you? First thing is that virtual teams are a reality in today's economy. If some of you hadn't really thought about how they might fit into your classes, I hope that listening to me today has made you start to think about how they might fit into your content area and enrich your students' abilities. They're more efficient, more effective in most cases. There's becoming a lot of research out there about some of the employee benefits that being on virtual teams can provide. like a lot of stimulation, mental stimulation. If they're working with peers from around the world who have a similar ability level, they may be more stimulated than working with the people down the hallway who don't have the same interests. And that's a really important thing. It also saves a lot on travel money if they can do this successfully. We don't all have to come together all the time. But, and that's a big but, our students need to be prepared. And I'm using our students in the big our, all of us. Because I've taught in Mexico for a semester, and there certainly were ways when I taught in Mexico, some of those students were more savvy than some of my American students in certain ways. There were other ways they were less savvy. And that's just being totally honest. They have different ways they've developed. And so I think it's really important to have dialogues like this and to bring in people from other places and talk about some of these things, because all of our students need to be prepared for the global marketplace and the global workplace, because your student might be working with my student, right? So what do they need? They need strong communication skills. And I think we need to know that that's the backbone of success in a virtual team situation. They have to be open to new relationships. They get to be 20 years old, 21 years old, and they think, I've got my friends settled and I like the way my life is. But they've got to be open to having e-friends, virtual friends in other places. And I think most students are, but there certainly are some students who that's kind of scary. That's kind of challenging for them. They have to have strong technology skills. And I don't just mean that they can Facebook their buddies, share about the party, right? They need to understand what technology can do for them and how important technology is in their career. They need to have some experience to give them a foundation. And I think that's the final message I want to leave, is I want to encourage you to think about ways this could be used in your classes, maybe a particular class that would be especially good. Maybe you want to join a consortium. Maybe you want to network within your trade, within your particular area. And I'm going to throw out something that might sound really bold here, but I think it would be even important for virtual teams within Mexico. Okay? I think it'd be great to have a student from Oaxaca, Monterrey, Puerto Vallarta, and Chihuahua working together on a project. Okay? It doesn't have to go across countries. Great when it does, because that's a whole additional dimension. But it can be just within Mexico or within South and Central America. Okay? So hear me clearly. I'm encouraging you to reach out. Use your own networks. Find ways that you can add to this skill base for your students. Because I've watched my students be challenged by it and grow, and I think it's really important. And if anybody wants to get access to my slides, I do have some citations at the end that can give you background on virtual teams as well. So I think we're ready for questions. Okay. Is there a possibility to join in research groups with the support of grants? How, where can we find information? Yes. I know from experience being at grant meetings that there are very often U.S. partners looking for Mexican partners. I don't remember exactly, don't know exactly how, what the agency would be in Mexico. I know SEP does some of the work with grants, but certainly if you have any colleagues at American schools that you meet at a conference, that's a good way to get dialogue going. There also, in the United States, is something that used to be called FIPSI. It's actually changing its name, but that's what our grants came from. They're not the only source of grants. In Mexico, there also is TIES grants from USAID, and I've worked with some of those and had similar projects with some of those. I would say talk to government agencies that supervise education. They may have leads, talk to people you meet at conferences. My school is on the second grant with Universidad de Nuevo León. We've worked with universities in Chiapas, Chihuahua, Jalisco, Querétaro, Guanajuato. So we worked with a lot of different people, and if sometimes I hear American schools who are looking, so it's sort of a networking thing. It's not easy to say, here's exactly where you go and find it, but watch for grant calls, talk to American partners. Those would be the basic sorts of things. What sort of steps are involved in order to associate a university for virtual teams with students and teachers? I think one of the big first steps is finding a partner. And one of the best ways I have found virtual team partners is by going to conferences that are international in my discipline. So if you're a finance professor, go to an international finance conference and network, exchange business cards, and start dialogues with those people. Sometimes it may not be that person, but it may be somebody they know. Okay, so networking is big, and that sometimes sounds intimidating, but don't be shy about it, because I'm very serious that many U.S. schools would love to partner with Mexican schools. So don't be scared about that. British American Tobacco Mexico uses virtual teams in order to get the best indicators about time, speed, answer capacity, and service quality. They do not have to be present in the same hall or office. What do Mexican companies need to get this kind of business culture? Ooh, that's a great question. I think it's a mindset of using technology in a bigger setting. I think there's a cultural change, and I know there are probably many other Mexican companies that use virtual teams. I'm sure Cemex does. I'm sure they do. I would be absolutely astonished if they don't have some virtual teams about something, given how far flung they are. But I think there is an embracing technology piece of the culture that needs to happen to move forward with virtual teams. And I'm going to use a metaphor for a moment. Probably 20 years ago, all of us talked about going international, right? And we talked about how we'd have an international class, and we'd segment it away, and we'll have a major in international business, and that's that. Now, all the disciplines talk about international, correct? Whether you're taking an accounting class or a finance class, multinational companies are used as examples, international is woven in. I think that's what we're just on the verge of getting to with information technology and virtual teams. Okay, right now, I think it started as, ooh, I'm going to take an IT class and they're going to have a virtual team. And we segmented it off and said, oh yeah, that's a technology thing. Let's let them teach about that. And now I think the mindset is just becoming every discipline has to involve virtual teams. So how can I do that in my class? And I think that's happening in companies too. Virtual teams were sort of, oh, we'll do that when maybe it's too dangerous to travel somewhere. It's a second choice. But I think as we've seen more success, and as some of that success has become documented, especially in probably the last 5 years, I think more companies are shifting their culture to involve virtual teams in their company's development. Any other questions? That's all. Okay.
Bueno. Para agradecer a la doctora Bárbara Rivens, vamos a darle un fuerte aplauso. Thank you, Bárbara. Le pido a la doctora Marta del Pilar haga entrega del reconocimiento, por favor.
Thank you, Doctora Bárbara Rivens, for your conference. It's a pleasure that have you been here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Go.